start, sir.
It gives us immense pleasure to welcome Mr. Kevin Nehemiah Phun, the founder for the Center of Responsible Tourism Singapore. Mr. Kevin is a specialist lecturer and occasional practitioner in the area of responsible tourism. Kevin lectures in various private educational institutes in Singapore and is a regular adjunct lecturer for Mudrok's tourism program in Singapore through Kaplan School of Higher Education. He is also involved in consulting work in ecotourism and community-based tourism work in the region and writes regularly for various organizations like TTG Asia, Mekong Tourism, in which he is the contributing expert, and for the Asia and Pacific Asia Travel Association. Mr. Kevin completed his MSc in Responsible Tourism program with the Leeds Metropolitan University in 2010 and has a PG in Sustainable Development with the School of the Oriental and African Studies. He has been in the tourism industry for over 17 years, working in various sectors. He started the Center for Responsible Tourism Singapore, where he carries out webinars on responsible tourism topics and created online courses for the same. Now, I would like to request Sir to please proceed with his session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Kevin. Please proceed with your session.
Thank you. Thank you. I can see from my screen that there's 122. So this is the biggest class I will be having this whole week. Good afternoon or good morning. It's slightly past. No, it's not slightly past. It's 2 hours after noon time, and it's I can see from outside it's going to rain soon. It always starts to rain when I start speaking. That's what my students also say. So good morning from where you are. I feel privileged to be able to come here to share with you something about pro-poor tourism, and I'm very happy that I have this chance to speak with you. Let me upload my slides. Okay, you can give me an indication if you can see my slides so that I can.
Yes, sir. It's
yes. Okay.
yes.
All right.
So,
thank you. Thank you.
So just do it in a slideshow view.
Yeah. All right. So I'm Kevin, and I started the Center for Responsible Tourism here in my country. From where I come from, responsible tourism is a very seldom spoken about topic, which means I'm quite useless in my country. I thank you for taking time out to come here to listen and to hear me speak on a topic which I'm very sure is not an alien topic in India. As I did my research on pro-poor tourism projects in India, I discovered that there has been quite a lot of projects, quite a lot of examples coming from the country. And so I thank you. I thank the school for giving me this chance, the university for inviting me to speak, to give this lecture. So you're my biggest class for the whole week, and if you have questions, if you have questions, there will be a Q&A session. So I titled this topic. I titled this topic because I have a keen interest on pro-poor tourism. It's something which we talk quite a lot about in Southeast Asia. I've been involved in a few of such work in the region. Once in a while, when I'm not involved in doing projects in this area, part of my interest is to travel around Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Vietnam, to have a look at how pro-poor tourism is being done in the other parts of Southeast Asia. So this is my family. I have one wife. One wife is good enough, and I have two children. Sorry, this photo is at least 2 years outdated. So my son is probably somewhere around my eyebrow, yeah. And the younger one is the daughter, very fearsome, just like her mother. So I did not want to choose a topic that is what we call a COVID-19 induced topic. Yeah, it has been in my mind. This topic has been in my mind for some time now. I've written an article for TTG Asia, where I was talking about how pro tourism projects can not just help to not just help to contribute to the area of alleviating poverty, but how pro tourism can actually help to raise awareness of intangible cultural heritage. So this is not a COVID-19 induced topic, although I will mention COVID-19 once or twice. So we are no strangers to pro-poor tourism. It has been a term that has been used 30, 40 years ago, especially in the 1980s when we started to see the rise in rural tourism. And I just taught a topic on rural tourism yesterday and this morning. So we have seen the rise in trying to bring the concept of tourism to places like the countryside. So we are largely no strangers to this term. We have seen how tourism can and have successfully been used to bring about tangible gains to the poor. And pro-poor tourism actually does exist in more than one form. We usually see pro-poor tourism in the rural areas because that's where more or less the term came up from. And now there has been some discussions on how we can use pro-poor tourism, not just in the rural areas but in the cities. You know, the poor don't only is not only found in the rural areas, but we do see what we call the urban poverty cases. So that's a little bit of the background when it comes to pro-poor tourism. In some countries, pro-poor tourism projects are run and managed by the NGOs. That happens quite a lot of times in Southeast Asia, and I'm quite sure to a certain extent that is also the case in India. Some of the pro-poor tourism projects are initiated by the NGOs, and then in the process, there's always this partnership with the local people. So I was sharing with you that the concept of pro-poor tourism is not something that happened 10, 15 years ago. It has been something which we have seen, particularly so in the last 20, 30 years. Coinciding with the trend of people going towards the rural areas, towards the late 1980s and the 1990s, when the cities started to be more and more crowded. So there has been this trend the last 2-3 decades of tourists wanting to move away from the crowded cities. We see all the talk now about the cities experiencing mass tourism. So this is the time where there's a bit more focus now, more and more focus on the rural areas. So this is the time perhaps there will be more focus and more interest from the governments, from the NGOs, from the different stakeholders towards taking a more serious look at what makes pro-poor tourism projects work. What could be the things that contribute to the failure of some of the pro-poor tourism work. There's quite a lot of things you can do in the rural areas, and if you think about such places, My young students, most of the time, will tell me these are places that they wouldn't want to go because there's no Wi-Fi. These are places where they cannot find the shopping malls, no cafes. Yeah. These are places which they will not be found most of the time. But there are quite a lot of things that you can do in such places. When we look at starting tourism in the rural areas, these are some examples of the aims and objectives. And this is one of the things that, that pro-poor tourism practitioners have to be aware of. One of the aims for many pro-poor tourism projects, whether you talk about Southeast Asia or India, one of the common aims when we talk about pro-poor tourism is we always hope that the presence of tourists will be an incentive for the local people to be able to preserve part of their culture. Pro-poor tourism has been proven to be, when it's run successfully, it has been proven to be a very strong motivating factor to help the local people to be able to protect and to preserve their heritage. So when you look at most pro-poor tourism projects, whether it comes from the West or if they come from the East, you can actually see that these are the common aims and the common objectives which we tend to associate them with. Pro-poor tourism has the objective of raising the quality of life of people in the rural areas. And I tend to refer to the rural areas, although it doesn't necessarily have to happen in the countryside all the time. Yeah. And when we look at pro-poor tourism, it's an opportunity to develop a stronger understanding of the culture, and so this has been the objectives and the aims for many pro-poor tourism projects. And when I go around the region where I'm based in, Southeast Asia, in the last few years, quite a lot of pro-poor tourism work which I've seen, they more or less have these aims. To ensure that the quality of life in the residents who live in the places where the pro-poor tourism projects can be found is being raised. So when we look at all these aims and objectives, one of the things which will often come to our mind is what are the issues that that most of these places face. When we look at the aims and the outcomes we hope to achieve from pro-poor tourism, one of the questions that will come to our mind is what are the developmental issues that are mostly associated with such places. So if you look at such places, they tend to face quite common developmental issues, a problem, the challenge of poor sanitation, the lack of clean water, the absence of opportunities to go to school, and so on. Yeah. So we get very excited when we think about the opportunity to bring tourism in, the presence of the tourists in this kind of places. Hopefully we'll be able to provide us with the resources to go about resolving some of the challenges that we often see. And unfortunately, there are pro-poor tourism projects that are not quite successful. There are those that have found success. Unfortunately, that on the same breath, we discovered that there are some pro-poor tourism projects which have not quite been very successful. And I present you 5 quite common reasons why some pro-poor tourism projects tend not to be so successful. One of the reasons why some of them don't quite enjoy as much success is that the aims and the objectives or the intended goals might not always from the start. Some of the goals of some of the pro-poor tourism projects were not really aimed at trying to resolve or to address the issues that the people in those places face. I was told in some of my travels, and once in a while in the projects which I did, I was told when the local people shared with me that in the past, the experiences that they had in the past, there were pro-poor tourism projects that they had taken part, but unfortunately, the involvement of the local people during those times were very little. So that is one possible reason why some pro-poor tourism projects fail to take off. The involvement of the local communities is something very important, because at the end of the day, if the pro-poor tourism projects is meant to deliver the benefits to the local people, yeah, it makes total sense for the people in the community areas to be involved. And so that's one of the things which I was told. That's one of the things where the local people tell me in some of the places which I have went. So there's a little bit of link. If you look at point number 2 and point number 3, when the local people are not so involved in the decision-making process, one of the things you end up with is some of the issues that the local people face may not be reflected in the strategies, in the objectives of those pro-poor tourism projects. Yeah. In some cases, pro-poor tourism projects are not quite able to bring in as much of the benefits as they hope for. Is that it's very NGO driven. When the NGO drives the project, there's nothing wrong. Yeah, please don't get me wrong. When the project is driven by the NGO, there's nothing wrong. In fact, there's a lot of pro-poor tourism projects that are largely driven by the NGO, the non-governmental organizations. But the problem with projects that are largely driven by the NGO is there could be times when there is an absence of the economic pillar, you know, where the project lacks the element of finding ways to make money. And when it doesn't make money, there's very little things to sustain the projects for the long run. Yeah. Making money from tourism is not a sin, and that is something which I also tell my own students. Making money from tourism is nothing wrong. Yeah, it's when the bias towards making money is skewed to such an extent that is the only thing that you think of. That is when that's when the whole thing is wrong. So I have intentionally placed the last 2 points side by side because I think in a way the 4th and the 5th point are somehow linked. One of the quite common reasons why quite a lot of pro-poor tourism projects fail to take off is there is not much research being done about how feasible the project is. You can have a very wonderful ecotourism project in the area with very good intentions to use ecotourism to benefit the local people. But if the demand from the market is close to zero, then there's a very high chance that the project will not take off. So I want you to realize when I say pro-poor tourism, try not to have a fixed mindset try not to have a fixed mindset that pro-poor tourism contains only one single tourism product, because ecotourism when ecotourism happens in a local community, that can be another example of pro-poor tourism. So these are the reasons which in my own travels, in the research which I've done, in the experiences when I go around places and I listen to people, what makes or what breaks pro-poor tourism projects. Sometimes it's the absence of the local voices. There are projects that are developed and run to a certain extent by outsiders. And these are people with absolutely very little idea of the challenges or the issues that the local people faces, you know. And when these projects are handed over to the village or to the local people, and I'm sure you have probably seen this once or twice, yeah. A group of outsiders starting and they manage the ecotourism or the pro-poor tourism project. And after some time they hand over. So there's always this handover ceremony, yeah, the handing over. Why can't the project be started and run and be managed by the local people? So there's no need for the involvement of the outsiders. So by the very fact that some of the projects are handed over, means that it was started by people who could very well have little knowledge of what actually goes, what are the actual the challenges and the problems that the people in this community faces, you know. So that is to reiterate one or 2 points, particularly point number 2 and point number 3. Yeah. So in my travels, one of the things which I keep on hearing is for pro-poor tourism to work, and pro-poor tourism can be community-based ecotourism. Any form of tourism that happens in a community where it is meant for the people in that community and where the intention is to lift people out of poverty, you can call that pro-poor tourism. Initiatives related to pro-poor tourism must have the intention to fulfill this, you know. It must be meant for the poor. So I think that's why I intentionally structured these few points in a way where the first few points are all linked. We like to measure, as human beings, we measure all sorts of things. We like to measure our height, I don't know, how long we can run, how long we can live. Unfortunately, there are things in our life which is very hard to measure. Progress in preserving cultural heritage probably is one of the many examples that we might have a hard time trying to find a way to measure. We like to measure things. In tourism projects, we like to find ways to track our progress, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic when we try and think of ways to see how far we have gone. And so in sustainable tourism, we like to use indicators, which I will touch on more shortly. And this is what I found in one of the academic journals which I read, which the author says that there has down the many years when we pioneered pro-poor tourism, there actually has not been much research into the success of the initiatives by different people to make tourism more pro-poor. Unfortunately and surprisingly, this happens to be so. And what I can think of is it's probably due to more than one reason why people has found it challenging to find ways to measure. Sometimes it could be the absence of resources like the financial resources, expertise, time, because when you measure, you will need time. Yeah, when you try to measure social cultural impacts, you need a lot of time. Quite a lot of things don't happen in the next few days. I wanted to put this as my first 1 or 2 slides, but there's a reason why I put it in the middle of my discussion. If you think of this word poverty, there has always been a misconception or an incomplete understanding. There has been an incomplete understanding of this very simple word. If you look at this word poverty, it means much more than just not having money in the pockets. You know, what makes a person poor? Not having money is just one of many examples of a person being poor. No access to medicine, no access to education, no access or very poor access to clean water. These are things that should be in that this word should constitute, you know. So as long as we have a very narrow understanding of the word poverty, I think pro-poor tourism projects will face a big challenge. As long as we don't widen our understanding of what this word means, we will go on and on and on with a very narrow, very one-dimensional pursuit of the benefits that pro-poor tourism should bring us. So it should not just mean that somebody doesn't have money in the bank account, you know. When we have an enlarged view, a more informed view of what makes a person poor. So it could be little or no access to medicine, to the doctor, to education, to clean water, you know. And then we will start to see practitioners, academics start to embrace the wonderful and the very wide view of what pro-poor tourism is supposed to mean. So we have seen progress. People now slowly understand that poverty is actually not just not having money. It is, but it is encompassing these few more things which I just shared, you know. So going forward, when we have an expanded view of what makes a person poor, when we have an expanded view of how pro-poor tourism strategies should contain, when we have an expanded view, an enlarged view of what kind of aims and objectives pro-poor tourism should have, we will start to see many more possibilities that pro-poor tourism should be. Yeah, it used to be this very narrowly defined, very small health scope. Yeah, but what I feel is in the last 10-15 years, there seems to be slowly a better understanding of what pro-poor tourism should look like. So and I think this is my last 6 or my last 7 slides. And I did a bit of research last few days. And I think I know where this place in India is, because I used to have students in Singapore who told me that they come from this part of the world. Yeah, if you don't know, we actually have quite a lot of students from India in our colleges. I have some students coming from different parts of the country. And so pro-poor tourism is something that has been embraced nationally in the tourism plan, not just in India. If you go and do a bit of research in Asia, there are countries like India who has also factored in, who has also embraced pro-poor tourism, using tourism as a tool to help reduce the problem of poverty. And this has been a big part of many countries' national tourism plan. And I thought I would come out with a slide to share with you what pro-poor tourism going forward should look like, should do. And the first 1 or 2 points seems to be carrying forward the few things which I was talking about. I think going forward, pro-poor tourism practitioners and people who are in charge of pro-poor tourism projects will be able to understand the many other non-economic factors that have an influence on the failure or success of pro-poor tourism work. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of disturbance in my background. This is an interesting week for Singapore. We're having an election. So in many parts of the country, the political parties are driving around the estates and you know, delivering their message. So if you happen to hear some noise in my background, I'm sorry. So I created this slide to build on what I've been saying in the last 30-40 minutes. I feel that environmental challenges will become a bigger and bigger factor when it comes to the planning of pro-poor tourism projects. I happen to do an ecotourism project on a remote island off East Timor. If you know where this very small and this very young country is, it's a breakaway. It broke away from Indonesian rule 17, 18 years ago. East Timor is not too far away from Australia, and so I was hired there by a few people to develop an ecotourism plan for this island. Very small island, 8,000 inhabitants. 5,000 tourists, still not very well known as a tourism destination. And I discovered that this place is also very near the Coral Triangle. If you are familiar with this part of Asia, yeah. Improving access, helping the poor to overcome obstacles, and the obstacles could be in the form of global warming. And you could be talking about areas where the fishermen, where the poor depend on fishing as their main form of livelihoods, and because of climate change, the practice of fishing has been kind of affected. So pro-poor tourism practitioners should consider that there are some non-economic factors that potentially have a very huge impact. And I also feel that when we talk about pro-poor tourism, it should enable the development of opportunities to create a stronger linkage, especially for the poor. When we talk about linkages, it's often one of the obstacles the poor face, because for the poor, the inability to make money or to gain as much of the benefits that they should be from tourism oftentimes comes from the fact that the linkages they have with the formal sector is weak. If you are not familiar with what I'm talking about, in tourism, we always talk about the formal sector and the informal sector. So when the linkages are not strong, and the linkages take time to develop, when the linkages are poor, you often see that the benefits don't really trickle down to the poor. Pro-poor tourism projects should find ways to protect the resources that the poor depends on. And I think point number 1 and point number 3 are somehow linked. I beg your pardon. I should actually put point number 3 next to the first point. Yeah. And when we talk about the resources that the poor depends on, it could be cultural resources. Pro-poor tourism often happens, not all the time, but often happens in the rural areas. And in the rural areas, we have both the tangible and the intangible aspects of heritage and culture. And one of the things that often happens in the rural areas is that there's this often occurring disappearance of the culture of the people, especially the intangible aspects of people's cultural of people's culture. So what I feel that pro-poor tourism projects and the people running pro-poor tourism projects should be aware of is that there is a need to preserve and to protect the resources, especially the very ones that the poor people depend on. If pro-poor tourism is to find success, I also feel that there is a need to overcome the obstacles that the poor tend to face. When we have an enlarged view of this word poverty, then point number 4 becomes natural. When we have a more informed view of what causes poverty, and what causes poverty in one area will often be very different from another area. So that's the interesting part about pro-poor tourism. You know, there's no really a template where you duplicate your projects, your success, because you could be successful within the same country. You could be successful implementing pro-poor tourism projects in the northern part of the country, but when you come to the eastern or the southern part of the country, you would discover that the duplication of the things might not always be possible. So I think identifying what causes poverty is key, or one of the key things. You know, once you're able to do that, then point number 4 becomes quite straightforward. And pro-poor tourism projects should always think about partnerships, local community people partnering the NGOs, local community people, one village partnering another village, which I saw. I seen with my own eyes when I went to the eastern part of Malaysia, this place called Sabah. I witnessed with my own eyes 1 or 2 projects at the foot of the mountain where they were given funding by the UNDP, and the project was something like pro-poor tourism. So they started to form community-based organizations, and there was a fair bit of partnering, you know, not just households, but villages. Yeah, one village partnering with another, and so when you form partnerships, you tend to become stronger. Sorry, I wanted to share with you this, but I think you can go and read up this project in your own time. This project happened last year, and it's kind of a pro-poor tourism related piece of work in Mongolia. Are you familiar? If you're familiar with the ADB, the ADB is also quite active in India, right? So part of what I was talking about, I spent some time talking about obstacles, the linkages for the informal sector with the formal sector should be something that the governments at the local level, the governments at the federal level should look at. You know, when the linkages are stronger, the leakages are lesser. So there's all sorts of obstacles, but what I in the last 10 minutes, what I tried to focus on 1 or 2 examples of the obstacles we always see when we try to introduce tourism to benefit the poor. Yeah, are the obstacles that the poor faces, and the poor often face quite a variety of of obstacles. And this is the research which I did. I told you I went online out of curiosity, and I found one or two pro-poor tourism projects in India. Kumarakom. I actually forgot which part of India this place is. Okay, if you can see my map, and the dotted red line should be where Kumarakom is. There are quite a lot of successful pro-poor tourism projects in India, you know, scattered throughout the country. So that could be one very good example for us to follow. And I'm not going to bore you by walking you through all the points here, but I just want to point you to a few key words in a few of these points. I just want to point you to a few key words. One of them is this word cohesiveness, cohesiveness. So there's always this need for people to understand what pro-poor tourism is about to bring us, you know, capacity building, which I'm sure you have heard of this term. Capacity building is not just me going to the village one time and to tell the people in the village that, hey, tourism is coming in 6 months' time, you get ready, yeah, you will benefit and you will be happy. And that's the only time when I come to speak with the people. But capacity building is ongoing. And I think there's a very strong link between how you prepare the people and how cohesive they end up. And there was one point which I touched on just now that talks about partnership. When you look at forming partnerships, it's probably quite a strong indicator that there's a fair bit of cohesiveness. You know, cohesiveness, once again, takes time. Yeah, cohesiveness means when people in the village understands their roles and they understand that there will be obstacles. In the project that I was involved in on the island of East Timor, one of the things which I shared with the local people is it takes time. I'm not here to tell you, I don't have a stick, and you know, I don't have a magic wand, and I'm not here to tell you that tourism is going to increase. The number of tourists coming to your island will double next year, and you will be rich. But no, I'm here to tell you realistically what's going to happen. Not everybody will benefit equally. You know, the textbook tells us that there's an equitable sharing of the benefits, but in reality, that doesn't happen as far as I have seen. Yeah, all right. So some will benefit more than the others. So I wanted to point you to this interesting word cohesiveness. So in the research that I've done on this part of India, they said that one of the success factors was that people knew what their roles and responsibilities, and I think it took them some time. You know, people don't automatically become cohesive from day one. You know, it takes time. And I want to point you to maybe another one or two parts. As I said, I don't intend to walk you through these few points. Yeah, you're going to find it very boring. But there is another point which I want you to look at. Is if you look at point number 3, many of the responsible tourism initiatives engage various industries, because tourism is an industry that touches many different sectors. You know, so there's a lot of people who may find that their livelihoods will be impacted when tourism happens in an area. So they got together the local people in the community, academics, the NGOs, and I want you to look at the 4th point where they tell you that that they also included the smaller stakeholder groups. There could be smaller stakeholder groups like the environmental groups, which might be small, but they are just as important to the success of your pro-poor tourism projects. You know. Sorry, I can't see what I've written here. yeah, pro-poor tourism, pro-SDGs, something which some of my young students unfortunately have no idea when I tell them, are you familiar with the 17 global goals? To my shock, some of them will tell me that they have not heard of, yeah, and that's one of the things that pains my heart. The 17 global goals, if tourism is to be successful, we have to recognize that that pro-poor tourism naturally have a very big role to play when we try to achieve more sustainable forms of development. Tourism itself touches on quite a few of the 17 goals, at least 4, if not 5. Yeah? Poverty, hunger, life below sea, life on land. So that's already 4. So that's more likely to be more than just these 4 or 5 goals. So my little project, someone from Indonesia, from the city of Bandung, contacted me last year, and I was down in this part of Asia. To give you a little bit of a context, yeah, Atauro Island. You can, if you go to YouTube, I think Miss Australia Universe made this little island slightly more famous. She has a few YouTube videos showing her holiday spent on this small little island, 1/4 Singapore size. We call my country a tiny island. So if an island is 1/4 Singapore size, this tells you that this island is very, very small. So I went to East Timor. I had to spend one night in East Timor, and the next morning, a 1 hour plus boat ride to this small little island. And this island, interestingly, is very near this part of the world, which is well known for its very rich biodiversity, the Coral Triangle. So just to give you an idea, see, it's quite near Australia. It's quite near Australia. It's near Darwin. So a lot of the 5,000 tourists, I was told 70% of the 5,000 tourists that this island receives every year comes from Australia. The remaining 30% are probably Indonesian and some of the European countries. Yeah. Interestingly, someone told me I am probably the second person on the island to wear glasses. This gentleman on your far right is the chief of one of the 6 villages. So the island has 6 villages, and each village has a chief, one village chief and one assistant village chief. And I forgot his name, but I recall that he is one of the chief. He is the chief of one of the 6 villages. Yeah. On my time on this island, I was there for a very short time of just 2 days, but I was there to see how ecotourism can be introduced onto the island. So you can say that my project, to a large extent, is about pro-poor. Yeah, and I was told when I was there, that I should change my perception of the meaning of the word poor, because I don't see people crying there. You know, I don't see people looking sad. I see happy faces. They make do with what they have. Yeah, they look happier than some of the people in my country. So they live on quite little, but they are happy. So there has to be an expanded and more informed understanding of this word poor. So when we say pro-poor tourism, going forward, we must have the understanding and the knowledge that we are not just trying to bring money to an area. There's a lot more we can bring in. In my own research, 2-3 weeks before I was due to fly to East Timor to go to the island, I did my research and I discovered that that what is making the people in Atauro Island, the fishermen's life, the fisherman has discovered that due to global warming, yeah, the livelihoods of the fishermen has been threatened. there has been a change in the way the local people there fish, and so that has implications on how tourism should be coming in. And so we have to consider all these developmental challenges which we probably have not quite thought of in the past. I'm coming towards the end of my sharing of my slides. I think this is the last or the second last slides. Yeah. So I intentionally shared with the communities there, with the village chiefs when I was there, that for pro-poor tourism or for ecotourism to find success, there has to be ownership. The local people has to own the projects. And I think this is my last slide. If I am running out of time, I should just very quickly talk about this like indicators for successful pro-poor tourism. What are the things that can tell us, what are the indicators to tell us that pro-poor tourism is successful? I came up with this few indicators. I think pro-poor tourism practitioners in whatever projects you are doing, you will be able you should be able to list out indicators that are specific to the kind of work that you do. So these are a few examples of indicators for successful pro-poor tourism. One of them is, I feel that there will be more focus, not just on the economic side of pro-poor tourism, but also on the non-economic side. Yeah, and for pro-poor tourism to be seen as successful, this should be the kind of tourism that brings about more awareness of the issues that the local people face. So I think that's all. Yeah, this is not intended to be a COVID-19 induced topic, but maybe there is a silver lining. In this country, we are starting to talk about how COVID-19 has actually, maybe it's not all doom and gloom. It has actually brought us a refreshed idea of many things. Thank you very much for your time, and that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin. We are really running short of time, but the session is very enriching, and a lot of valuable points you have shared. Quickly, I would like to request Professor Vandita to please pick up good, relevant questions, so that the speaker can address them. Thank you.
Am I audible, sir?
I think there's an network issue from Professor Vandita. I'll just pick up few questions.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible, ma'am.
Okay. Please continue.
Okay, so the first question is, how can travel agents undertake a pro-poor approach towards the industry?
How can travel agents take a pro-poor approach in the travel industry? Is that the question? Was that the question? How can travel agents take a pro-poor tourism approach?
Yes.
Okay, right. There's always this consideration of bread and butter. Yeah, it is not easy for travel agents, especially if you are small, to go and think about creating travel packages that can benefit the poor and still be able to make money as a business. Yeah, we have to be realistic. We cannot just say that it's the duty of the travel agents, because when we look at the point of view of making money, a travel agent is, after all, still a business. Yeah, and they have to make a profit. So I am not sure if I can answer this question very well. But what I feel is in some places they actually have a coalition of travel agents, because together you are stronger. If you just go as one single travel agent, a lot of things you cannot do, because you may be specialized in adventure travel, you may be specialized in culinary tours. So if you come together, there's always strength when you are group. So I see that trend. There are countries that banded together a group of travel agents, and when we have travel agents each with their own specialty, wow, pro-poor tourism projects suddenly become more possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have a next question from one of our students. She is asking, how can the ones, especially youngsters, who have not really seen much poverty, relate to the concepts of pro-poor tourism?
Well, then you have to do what I've been doing the last 10 years. You have to go out and travel, to the villages. You have to go and see for yourself. I was actually talking to a tour operator from India, a very interesting company. If you want to do a bit of research, GHE. Oh dear, I forgot what it stands for. GHE, Himalayan Expedition, Global Himalayan Expedition. They specialize in Ladakh, the mountainous areas, and they won some awards. ITB Asia, they were here last year, which is how I met them. And so I think if we keep on saying that young people are the future leaders and they are the way forward, but unfortunately, quite a lot of young people with the resources live in the cities and they have not seen poverty at first hand. So it's quite hard, Yeah. So I think one of the ways is to go and travel yourself, because when you go and travel by yourself, that's where you get to see things, and that's where you get to hear things firsthand. You see? Yeah.
So we will take one last question for the day. So the question is, what should be the role of the local governments in supporting pro-poor tourism activities?
The local government. Oh, well, I think there's a few things. There are things that the government can do. So I noticed that the question is asking more on the local one rather than the federal one. Yeah? The government at the local level probably in a way has a bit more freedom, but the government at the local level still has to answer to the federal one, right? There are things which the government at the local level can do. I think one of them is to create opportunities where the private sector can come together, which is what I was saying. Encourage the tour operators and the travel agencies in the country or in the area where they are concerned, to explore going away from traditional itineraries, which is something that I started seeing in quite a lot of places. Travel agents now are threatened by technology. So in many countries, the traditional way to run a travel business is now outdated. So there has been quite a lot of niche travel operators springing up. In my country, in quite a lot of places, I am sure. And some of these are operated by younger people who have inherited. So I think for the government, there's a lot of scope where they can work. There's a generation of travel companies now being run by younger people, who have the aptitude and who have the heart to go and explore this kind of very niche travels. So as far as the government, the local government can do, creating pro-poor tourism policies could be something else. Pro-poor tourism policies, by and large, has been absent, what I can say, why many countries' tourism policies somehow don't embrace pro-poor tourism is probably is a concept that many people find it very hard to grasp. You know, it's a very abstract concept, and for many countries, the tourism policies tend to revolve around economics. You know, sometimes they revolve a bit around cultural policies. So that could be something that the governments can think of, how to include or how to embrace pro-poor tourism policies in the tourism policies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin, for this valuable session. You have been focusing on plethora of topics. You have spoke about pro-pure tourism, how to reduce poverty, what the role of NGO, the impact of in rural areas, the challenges of pro-pure tourism projects, its environmental effects, the role of governments, the role of local people, sharing examples of various projects across different geographical locations, including India, having a more of a cohesive and holistic approach, and most importantly, the indicators for successful, pro-pure tourism projects. And you have patiently handled the questions of the participants. It was really an enriching and valuable session for all of us. On behalf of Amity University Kolkata and Amity Institute of Travel and Tourism, would like to thank you very much for your wonderful and valuable session.
Thank you.
Very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day and a good week.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.